Well, joining us now is Alberta's Minister for the Environment, Rebecca Schulz. Minister, really good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's great to join you this morning.
Listen, I want to begin with Pierre Poilievre, obviously standing in the House today, introducing this motion that would extend essentially a tax cut to all forms of heating in the country. What's your reaction to that?
You know, we just introduced a motion in the Alberta legislature the other day for the federal government to essentially get rid of the carbon tax. I mean, what we're seeing is the federal Liberals allowing a carve out for one area of the country and not really respecting the fact that the carbon tax is driving up the cost of living in every province across our country. And this is completely unfair. So we were asking for unanimous support in our House for that. I'm happy to see that happening in Ottawa today as well.
Now, of course, the federal government has been asked about this, and to that, I do want to raise a couple of points here, because first, when you speak to Liberals, they argue not all decisions will benefit all parts of the country equally. For example, the federal government investing in the Trans Mountain Pipeline, the expansion. And they also say that giving people a break on home heating oil is really about giving, Canadians, whether they be in Atlantic Canada or elsewhere, the opportunity to switch to a cleaner source of energy. How do you respond to those pushbacks?
So I would say, first of all, provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan, they don't have an option either. Our option is natural gas. And natural gas is actually lower emissions than a lot of the heating oils that we're talking about. So, when I look at the incredible affordability pressures that Canadians are seeing across the country. We have heard this for a number of years. Certainly, we've heard it in Alberta since the carbon tax was introduced. The consumer carbon tax is not reducing emissions. It is driving up the cost of every aspect of our day-to-day lives, from groceries to gas to our utility bills. And I think at a time like that, when essentially Prime Minister Trudeau is admitting that, this is because it's about affordability and the high cost of fuel, we are seeing those high costs across the country, and it is wildly unfair to allow a carve out for one area of the country and not the rest. And I mean, we're happy for Atlantic Canada Canadians to receive that break. What we're saying is we see a lot of unilateral decisions being made by the federal government. And again, we're asking for that fair treatment.
Okay, you mentioned affordability. The federal government also points to the federal backstop, because under that scheme, as you know, as they say, all revenues collected for the carbon tax is returned to Albertans with, and this is a quote to you, with all but the wealthiest 20% getting more in rebates than they actually pay out.
It's still something that we hear every single day. It is absolutely driving up, of course, the cost of utilities like we're talking about today. But given where it's applied, I mean, we hear it from school divisions who are concerned about their increased budgets because, again, of the carbon tax on fuel. We're seeing it on groceries because of it being applied throughout the supply chain. This is absolutely ridiculous. It has an impact on everyday families, on seniors who are on a fixed income. And quite frankly, I think we've heard loud and clear from Canadians that they just don't want to see this carbon tax in place. I think what we've seen here, quite frankly, is, frenetic and panicked policy by a government that is seeing their popularity tank in the polls. It doesn't seem to make any sense. And, what we're saying is, to be fair, across the country, that they should allow other provinces and other forms of heating to have the same reprieve.
Okay, so how do you accomplish two things, though? Because when you poll Canadians, yes, affordability is a top issue, but the environment remains a top issue as well. How do you address both affordability and essentially make environmental gains without something like the carbon tax?
We are making environmental gains. And to talk specifically about Alberta, there's a couple of examples that I use. First of all, we've reduced emissions in our electricity sector by 53% since 2005. Again, that does have a cost. I mean, Albertans are still going to be paying for the next number of years, $100 million every single year to help with that transition off of coal-fired generation. That's $100 million a year that could go to healthcare, to education, to helping people with utility bills. And so there is a very real cost to that. Now, when we look at methane emissions, for example, if we had done things the way that the federal government wanted to do them, it would have been more costly and less effective. We are actually ahead of schedule. Our goal is 2025 to reduce 45% of methane emissions reductions. We are at 44%. Those numbers were as of last year, so we're well on track. And again, we wouldn't have gotten there if we had followed the federal government's approach. I think when we look at things like energy development, electricity, provinces know best how to manage those resources. Obviously, they're areas of provincial jurisdiction. And so, I think fundamentally it comes down to the approach. We can make sure that Canadians have access to affordable and reliable energy and power and still reduce emissions. Alberta is showing that you can absolutely do both.
Okay, I only have about 30 seconds, but I do have to ask you, because we already heard the Prime Minister say that there will be no further exemptions. So where do you go from here? As you said, you passed your own or introduced your own legislation, your own statements in your own legislature, but where do you go from here if the Prime Minister is saying no?
That's something we're going to have to look at. I mean, over the last number of weeks, we've had a campaign encouraging Canadians to tell the feds that their clean electricity regulations are unacceptable and that, Canadians are not okay with increasing costs and risky reliability in our power grids. I think that they're going to continue to hear from Canadians, and I would encourage the federal government, a government who has a responsibility to represent all Canadians, not just those who voted for them, to listen and to use common sense over ideology.
Minister Rebecca Schulz, appreciate the time. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much.